What is up, YouTube? It is Aaron back here with the channel. I'm joined once again by Cormac Adams. Say hello, my friend.
Hello, hello. Happy to be back.
Alrighty, and we are doing more Dude review. We are going to continue the series as part two, where we're going to start actually building some of the deck lists that we reviewed last time when we saw some of the new cards. So we're going to go through Dracotail, Crystron K9, Vanquish Soul, Yummy, and then we're also going to look at the new DDD deck. And then maybe in the future I'll go over something like Madness Storm and Sky Striker, see what those look like, but I'm the least comfortable with those right now, so I don't want to like give you bad information as I'm learning. So we're just going to go with what I think like are some of the easier changes and some of the adjustments, and then we'll look at the DD deck, which is something that I've had a little bit of experience with, but not too much. So yeah, we're just gonna hop right into it. So we've got the Dracotail deck. We're gonna do kind of just like the outlines of all of the decks, ignoring the non-engine just because those are gonna change format to format. We'll go over a little bit of what we think could be viable. Like obviously in the Dracotail deck, we're gonna prefer monsters, usually hand traps. But in terms of like which specific cards, it's gonna kind of be defined by what the meta looks like, and I'm not gonna feed you false information prior to actually having an understanding of what it looks like. So we've got just like the normal Dracotail engine maxing out on Pan. This is kind of based off of Jesse Cotton's list that he played in Vancouver. And then the new cards are Frixel, which is another set if it is used for fusion summon. And then when it's normal or special, you get to bounce summon a card from graveyard, a Dracotail monster from graveyard, and then bounce a monster on the field. So it can get you a card like 5 mana back to hand, obviously itself. So it has a little bit of utility in that regard. Then the trap card, which we went over last time, target a monster, enter spell, and trap in your opponent's graveyard banish, and then the same effect to recycle. So, Cormac, we have these two cards. Do you think they just go automatically into the main deck as one ofs, multiples? Do we just like side them? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, both of these cards are quite interesting because neither of them, well, obviously the trap card, but even the monster, neither of them are, adding extra consistency into the deck, and they're not additional starters or anything like that. These are more kind of, extra utility pieces that are being added into this deck, which I think is quite good because I think this deck needs, a couple more pieces, especially onto its end board. I think, one of the things that we notice when at least for myself, when I see Dracotail being played, and from my little bit of experience as well, is that, you'll have the two traps and you'll have a 5 mana access, but you're maybe missing that extra 1 to 2 pieces of interaction. So things like the trap card, I think the trap card is a little bit debatable, but I think in terms of when I'd be looking to start playing with this deck, I would definitely be testing with it as a one of within the deck. I think it is the weakest of the three trap cards, but it just being another piece of interaction that can be usable, especially into things like the Yummy matchup. I think it'd be quite relevant there. And then I think you start working with it from there. I think I would probably lean towards main decking one of it. But then depending on how the format progresses, this might be something that sees a little bit less play, especially just because of the fact that it is being a third trap card. It is a third card that isn't really doing a whole lot for you, especially when you're going second. So it's definitely a card that I think would be between a zero and a one of, but I think I would lean towards having one in the main deck for now. When we talk about Frixel, I think this is also a card that I would personally, anyway, look to be having as a one of in the deck. Again, it's a utility piece, and it also isn't giving you the same benefits going second as a card like having a Pan or even an Urgula in your hand would be. Because when you draw those paired with like a Flamina, for example, you're able to use those effects to be able to interact with a lot of the things that your opponent is doing. Whereas the Frixel is just setting you an extra Dracotail spell trap, which isn't really doing a whole lot for you going second. So you wouldn't really want to be playing it anymore. You wouldn't want to be like actively drawing it in a lot of these cases. You kind of just want to be accessing it from things like the Rahu, for example, like from your deck. So I think both of these I would probably be having as one of in the decks as in the deck at the moment. I don't know if you have any sort of differing opinions on that, but that's kind of my first takeaway from that.
Oh yeah, I think it makes sense. I was looking for some OCG deck lists that play Dracotail. A lot of them are playing them with just his cards, and we're still missing Spoon, if I remember correctly, the name of the card. So I've had some friends that are testing the deck as I get some more games in against them. I'll like have a better idea of like what the entrance should look like. But in a more pure variant, yeah, I think these cards are at most one of thing is kind of nice because it's the only trap that you can kind of use proactively. Like you could, especially like going second, like there's always going to be a card in graveyard. Um, so you have that benefit to it. So it's also like a way to like get the traps in rotation quickly. Like if you're concerned with like getting cut off of like a storm or something. Um, but yeah, overall, I think it's definitely like it's another layer that is nice, but at the same time, it doesn't contribute to your game plan of like having monsters in hand. And it just yeah, Frixel is like cool. Maybe if you're doing like some more combo lines with something like Mysterion or Secretarion. But in general, I think these cards are at most one ofs. And again, they don't really fix any of the problems with the deck, which is a bit of an issue. Like we'll see with Yummy, which we'll get to later. Like it's getting one card, but it fixes like a majority of the deck's problems, which is really nice. And these are just like kind of you mentioned additional utility pieces that maybe help the deck out a little bit, but don't really fix any of its primary problems. Alrighty, so now that we have Dracotail, we are going to look at Crystron, and this is an OCG deck list, just in terms of, let's say, what they've topped with. Pretty normal in terms of what we've seen from the TCG in terms of what's included. And then there's two Noroi, which is the new Vanquish Soul card, or the new K9 card, sorry, which is a normal summon that summons a K9 from deck. And then you're launching the K9 from extra deck while it's on the field. And then a face-up K9 card you control to the graveyard, look at your opponent's hand. So it has a little bit of utility in terms of getting hand knowledge, so you can go like Noroi, summon Lantern, Lantern out of case, and then like send case after you have like a Jokel or an Azuna. So yeah, it has utility. It's an starter, and as you'll see in the deck list, there was a Platinum gadget in the extra deck, which turns Noroi into full combo. You can still make Infinite Track. What's it called? River Stormer. River Stormer. So you can now turn Noroi, which is a machine monster, and then River Stormer into Platinum gadget, which is a good scrap recycler out of your hand. So Cormac, looking at this kind of like TCG, this is like the old deck list in terms of like the engine inclusions. How would you change this with Noroi now in the format?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say with regards to the K9 engine and Noroi in particular is I think this is the deck that, of the decks we had, currently in TCG, so between Crystron and Vanquish Soul, I think this is the deck that I think pairs up with the K9 cards the best and kind of makes the best use of them. I think with Vanquish Soul, like at least in my opinion, the cards almost kind of like stumble into just like working well together because the deck has just very powerful level 5 monsters, whereas in this there's a lot more sort of very clear synergy. When it comes to Noroi in particular, I think the fact that it itself is just increasing the amount of starters that you have in this deck is just really, really strong. Not to mention the fact that you're just getting, the ability to look at your opponent's hand, I think is extremely powerful. It is one of those things where it's not that it necessarily completely dissuades, but say, if people are looking to play like board breakers in the format, you having the full knowledge of like what your opponent has in their hand. Say if they have like a triple tactics thrust, for example, this actually ended up happening in one of my test games yesterday. My hand had an engine card and like double thrust, and my opponent was just even if they didn't make a full board, they just were able to sit on stuff and just didn't activate any effects, and then I wasn't really able to play the game. So hand knowledge is always very, very sort of valuable on that front. I think looking at these cards here, I would say Noroi, I would definitely play a couple of copies of it at least within this deck. Probably be not sure whether I'd be going between two or three. You have to sort of recognize that Scrap Recycler, if you draw it, like you were able to get it out of your hand with the Platinum gadget with that combo, but it is still like a normal summon that you probably will be trying to just, hard normal summon itself whenever you draw it most of the time. So probably Noroi, I would say probably is a minimum of a 2 of in this deck, could potentially go up to a 3 of. I think the card is very, very good in Crystron K9. When I look to some of the other cards we have mentioned here as well, we see the Jacks as another sort of rank 5 option. This is maybe a bit more of like a general point around like this card in different K9 decks. I think this card is quite strong, just being like another option to go into, with your K9 cards. It's a bit more of a proactive piece when you're playing into boards as opposed to the Ripper, being able to just, immediately summon it, force out something, and then if your opponent has anything else you have to deal with, you just kind of have another big body that you're able to play with at that point. I think these cards they help Crystron do what it's always trying to do, which is just make that big combo going first, and kind of having that extra ability to just look at your opponent's hand is definitely, especially in a deck like this, is very, very valuable. So yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. I think, like you said, this deck definitely takes advantage of the synergy between the fives and River Stormer and Crystron's like all super efficiently. So this is definitely the deck that I think is going to take it the biggest advantage in terms of Noroi outside of like maybe a deck that plays pure K9. Obviously in the Vanquish deck we'll get to like the line with that and Saryuja, but it's like a little bit more kind of hoping you get there compared to like this deck having like a confirmed this is how you play with Noroi and this is how it. Um, yeah, I think in terms of consistency, you're already at like a pretty solid number between like the number of like Jokels plus Sulfador versus obviously it's like combo on its own. And when you open that hand, like you just don't even need to go for the Scrapper Selector line. You already have everything. So I think this may be like 1 to 2 of, like obviously the card you can search off a case or K9. I think that may shift your perspective, like especially if a deck like Ryzeal doesn't gets hit in the ban list. Chaotic Elements becomes maybe a little bit less good. So maybe like prefer more case because case can search Noroi as a normal summon, which is a real combo. But like let's say this is our current list, and I would maybe just put in 1 or 2 Noroi either in addition or cutting out maybe like an Azuna to 2. But otherwise, in terms of the engine, like I don't really think like I think this engine's already like pretty streamlined. I would maybe just like throw in a Noroi as like a case target. Because I think the deck already has like pretty solid consistency. Maybe you need the second one just to like try and up the numbers. Like if you're playing Prosperity, playing Noroi instead of that may just be better, so you get to maintain your extra deck consistency. Um, and also have the appropriate number of starters. I haven't done the full math on this deck, but I think overall it looks relatively good. Maybe like a few extra pieces, like with the K9 Vanquish Soul deck, like that deck is going to struggle with consistency and may prefer more Noroi outside the normal summon conflict. But with this deck, I think Noroi immediately fixes some problems. Like it gets you into the combo, and it's like the preferred way to do it because it has synergy with the way your deck already functions. So probably just like throw two in there. So it'd be 27 cards. We put Platinum Gadget in the extra deck. Would probably cut something like either the Paradise Smasher if that card gets banned, or Imperial Princess Kinkiri, something like that, just to make space. Zeus being made is kind of hit or miss, Durandal, depending on if you're playing Draw Longer. So I think there's like some utility in the extra deck that you can make space for Platinum Gadget because this card is kind of required for you to have Noroi be a starter. And then Jax, I think, is kind of hit or miss depending on how deep you want to play. If you're playing Force Release, card seems like okay, but not great. I'm not sure how necessary you think it is in the deck, but it seems like just like another solid rank 5, but it's not just like an auto included in all of the rank.
For sure.
Alrighty, so yeah, just another quick look at the OCG deck list. So you have Platinum Gadget, and then just rank 5 toolbox with Nash Knight and C101. So that's another card that you could be playing in the list, which I probably would end up doing. Nash Knight is just such a broken card in the rank 5 toolbox that I think every deck should be playing it if they can. So we're going to move on to Vanquish Soul K9. We're going to look at a couple of different OCG deck lists. They're going to be pretty similar to the TCG. So this is a list from, where is this? 3v3 event, which is, just a high level, I think it was from China, if I remember correctly. So just a normal, whatever, Vanquish Soul ratio, 1 and 1 of the big guys. 3 Joker, we've got 1 Noroi Lantern, 2 Azuna, and then 1 case for K9, and no quick play spell in the main deck. No Werewolf in this extra deck either, so I'm going to assume it's not in the side deck either. And Prosperity, just normal, I think pretty standard non-engine ratio for what we've seen. And then we'll look at the second list, which actually doesn't include Noroi at all. It has 3 Zuna instead, and no Prosperity, but I think it's swapped for like a nib in terms of space. And then this one, I assume, so this one does play X-Force Release and Werewolf. But again, so no Noroi in this list, even though it does choose to play X-Force Release and Werewolf. And then we look at the TCG, so this is kind of like an outline of what we expect the deck to look like over here. We'll have the discussion on how we perceive Jokel to be in the deck from our side. But in my head, if you're choosing to play Jokel in a format that plays Maxi, then you're probably going to be comfortable playing it in a format like the TCG where we don't have Maxi. So I think I would prefer to play a more K9 heavy package. The list that I've been playing lately has Max Jokel, Lantern in case, and then if I play X-Force Release, it's in the side deck. Yeah, so Cormac, what are your thoughts? How does Noroi fit into this deck? Obviously, it's a normal summon. We play a lot of normal summons in the deck. So tell me how you perceive it into the deck.
Yeah. So kind of based off of what you said already, Neroy's place in this deck, at least from my opinion anyway, is going to be largely dictated by how heavy of the K9 engine you're going to be playing. I think if you're playing the one Jokel just as your dark target to be searching off of Ripper, I think you wouldn't be looking to play cards like Noroi. I think that slot is probably going to be taken up by some piece of non-engine that's being played in your deck, or maybe something else that's looking to increase raw consistency in terms of like a raw consistency outside of just Noroi being your another normal summon play. So something like a Small World or a Pot of Extravagance, which we've seen some play recently in TCG. However, when you're playing the 3 Jokel package, I think Noroi makes a lot more sense as a one of. I think you mentioned in our previous video that I think Logan Johnson has a video up talking about how with Noroi in the deck, you're able to make a Sayuja line with a Ripper up to be able to access engine in that way. And I think when you build your deck that way, where you play 3 Jokel, you play 1 case, you play 1 lantern, and then I think you would play 1 Noroi in amongst all of that. Now, in my opinion, when I look at that, I see a lot of cards that could be quite clunky. So that's a separate discussion to sort of which way is like maybe the more correct. But I feel like when you make your decision about how many K9 cards you're going to be playing, I think you'll very much figure out very quickly whether you play 0 Noroi or 1, sort of based off of that. I don't think you'd be playing any more than that in this deck just because of kind of what you mentioned. You're already playing 3 Raisin, 3 Mad Love. It's a lot of normal summons in your deck, and this card isn't really better than those cards because it doesn't really function better paired than those cards do. Whereas, say, compared to the Crystron deck, That deck has a higher density of like level 5 monsters that'll be able to just put themselves onto the board. So if you get interacted on the Noroi and the Crystron deck, you'll also be able to use it as like a rank 5 play if you have any other play alongside it. Whereas in this deck, not really probably going to be as common of a case. And also if you draw like a Raisin or a Mad Love alongside it, it's not really doing anything for you either. So yeah, that's just kind of my opinion on Noroi in this deck. I think it's either a 0 or a 1 of and that's dictated by the rest of your K9 engine.
Yeah, I think it's good points. So I think like if you look at something like Julian Kahan's list from Worlds, obviously the winner, he played 3 case of K9. So I think so in that situation where you have 3 case of K9, you would definitely enjoy having that card as an option. If you're playing just like 1 case, it's just like an additional starter, and then otherwise it's just kind of there for when you need first. Like we've seen more lately, some people are like siding cards for going first, just like instead of the chummies, they just want like more engine. So I think I would maybe have it like you could potentially, if you don't main it, maybe side a copy for going first, just like have it, so you have an additional starter. But again, like a lot of normal summons can get cloggy, so I think at most it's a 1 of, and if I had to guess, on average it's probably going to be 0 for us over in the TCG. I think between Prosperity and then obviously we play cards like Extravagant Small World. I think like I don't mind the bigger K9 package with 3 Coco, but I think adding an additional normal can already get kind of clunky, especially going second. So it's probably not my preferred approach. So next we have DDD. This was the only list I was able to find. I'm gonna have some links down in the description of people in the TCG that have been showing like combo videos and their deck lists and take on the deck. I haven't spent as much time as them, so I'm just gonna like give a brief overview of what the strategy of the deck is, and then what the engine's supposed to look like. So this is the TCG version, or like how I think it translates to the TCG. This is based off of the deck list you're going to see down in the description. I think one was 100D, and I remember I'll definitely have it in the description as well. I don't remember who. So the main goals of the deck are to make this new rank 4 Wisdom King Solomon. You're playing a couple of cards like Griffin and Scale Surveyor, which are just bodies that summon themselves and become level 4s. So now you have, if you're able to make rank 4, you have any DDD card in your deck available, which can get you a card like Zero King Demise Machinex, which sets any Dark Contract from your deck. Or it can also obviously set Dark Contract with a Zero King, which summons from deck. And then we've got these utility pieces, Necro Slime, which is a Miracle Fusion from the graveyard. Copernicus, which is a Foolish Burial, so it's going to send something like Necro Slime. And then I think this is a similar effect. Card is in your graveyard, target Dark Contract, destroy it, and special summon. So it's a level 2 tuner. So it's a Lamia, but it's a little bit better because now we have a level 6 Synchro, which also summons from graveyard, if I remember correctly. Right when I banish, right when I graveyard sets. Yeah. So it gives you like even more efficient access to Caesar compared to something like Lamia, which is like, a little bit more awkward with like the level modulation. Like level 1 doesn't work as well with the current iteration of the deck. And then obviously we have Gilgamesh, which is like the other really broken part of the deck. Link 2 monster, you get to place 2 scales from your deck on summon, and then you're locked into deities for the turn. Obviously based on your extra deck, not a big concern. That's the entire extra deck so far. Yeah, so Cormac, what are your initial thoughts on the deck? Do you think it has a place in the meta going forward? And then just give me where you think it's at.
Yeah, I think based off my little bit of looking into this deck, I think it is more than likely going to fall into just a strong tier 2 deck. Partially because at the end of the day, it is just it is a very good combo deck, and when it goes first and it goes uninterrupted, or if people are playing more of the 1-for-1 hand traps and they have multiple pieces of engine, then they're going to be able to chew through that very quite well. So I think it's definitely going to see some play there as a result, at the very least on the regional scene. I think when I look at decks like this, I think I might be repeating some of the points from the previous video, but I think I want to make them made here, is that these decks, they're going to be largely dictated by their ability to be able to play going second, and that is also going to impact your non-engine choices. So in decks like this, a lot of the time, if you're playing like a very heavy combo deck, and this deck has a decent number of starters, but I feel like a lot of these hands, when I look at just the raw engine here, you see there's about 25 cards or so, and like maybe 1 or 2 of these are not even completely mandatory. You maybe look to increase the count of some of these other cards, but it's not going to be like a ton of like 1-card combos. Like this isn't like obviously not Snake Eye level, but to give you an example of like Snake Eye, how every single card that you play is like an immediate something that has to be interacted with. If this is requiring sort of multiple cards to play, it probably or you have a few number of 1-card starters, and if that gets stopped, then you have a little bit more of a choke point once you have that second card that you place down. It'll mean that you probably have fewer room for your sort of more fair non-engine, so like those were the one for one hand traps, and it probably dictates those how those sort of slots are built. And when you start going into the realm of like playing some sort of board breakers or things such as that then your success is then going to be dictated by how good those cards are into the format. So that's kind of where my base view of DDD is going to be. I think it's going to be very much dictated by sort of how those non-engine slots are going to enable you to sort of go second into the format. Because I also, even just looking at a lot of the older cards here and even some of the newer ones, the card quality when you go second isn't also like the very highest either. Like not a lot of these are just immediately threatening something when they hit the board. So I think it's going to struggle probably a little bit on that front. But that's kind of like the puzzle that people are going to have to figure out as we bring this deck into the TCG.
Yeah, I think it was all fantastic points. So yeah, in a deck like this where it's kind of like like a hyper consistency deck in terms of like contract, you have Nightmare Throne, you have the Scale Surveyor, sorry, not Scale, Count Surveyor, which on summon like adds a DDD with 0 attack or defense, so you get to add Kepler. So you have a lot of these ways to get to like the same cards, but at the same time that also leads to like some maybe pretty obvious choke points, like a card like Machinex, like if this card gets ogred, like maybe that's like pretty important to your combo, or like ogring Dark Contract with Zero King, right? Because I think that's I think you can ogre all of these cards. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like maybe an ogre in the correct spot. Obviously, a Droll and Lockbird is going to perform rather well against you, just because the deck is just searching a lot. Obviously, there's a little bit more placing and a little bit more graveyard manipulation, so probably still solid, but a card that will probably be impactful. And then you have to look at obviously like the strength of the inboard. So we've got like, a card like Siegfried, which is like a targeted spell and trap negate. We've got a card like Caesar, which has just been fantastic over the past 2 or 3 years. So we'll see where this deck ends up. I think, like you said, definitely competitive in the regional scene. But overall, we'll see how it plays out at the top tier level. This is a deck that also gets to play Impulse, so maybe it takes a spot of a deck like Malice, obviously to a lower extent because Malice is just very overpowered, very difficult to interact with. Like the fact that more standard hand traps like Ogre and Droll are going to be more impactful against this deck will definitely lower its tier compared to Malice. But I think it may have that role of just like a really strong combo deck, gets to play Impulse, has like a reasonable amount of non-engine space, and then we'll see how this deck can adapt to going second. Because obviously you can't really play cards like Zeus just because like you get locked in DVDs pretty quickly. But it will have some restrictions, but I think it definitely will have its place to shine, and it'll probably do well if there's someone who like knows the deck inside and out. Maybe similar to like a deck like Memento, where it kind of came out of nowhere. Like we always knew it was possible, but like some pilot, Pascal was able to just like put as much time into it as possible and just like play it at an elite level and win a YCS with it. Yeah, we have the last deck, which will probably be the most discussed one of the next few weeks, is the Yummy deck. So this is a couple different variants from the OCG. So both of them, I believe, are playing 3 Marshmallow. And then obviously just like a lot of non-engines. We've got Fuwas and Berlias along with Maxi. Obedient School still in the deck. This one's playing 3 Pure Ice Map. And the one thing that we forgot to mention last time, and I think we recognized quickly after, is like why they're not playing Hornet Drones, because obviously Maxi. So Maxi performs substantially better into that starter compared to this, where if you go like Pure Ice Map for Cupsy, now like Maxi's going to perform like pretty neutrally compared to like it'll be like similar to a Fuwa, where like you normal summon, you snatch, you may give them a +1 compared to Fuwa only being like a neutral, like a 1-for-1. But at the same time, like it's way better than Hornet Drones, where if you go activate Hornet Drones, you get Maxi, like you're giving them like 3 draws to do anything meaningful. That's including not even making a snatch. I think in the TCG, because we don't have to be concerned with a card like Maxi, we'll probably still include Hornet Drones over here. We see cards like Silvera of the White Forest, which is pretty good into a card like Droplet. So if they Droplet your Herald, you can now synchro that off with a card like a Lolipo or Cupsy, and then that is a Book of Moon on summon, and then also performs double piercing if it gets back to your turn. And then yeah, so obviously it's like a pretty heavy non-engine deck. This one doesn't it only plays 2 Pure Ice Map, a little heavier on like the normal summon number of all of the yummy monsters compared to this one, where it's two cookie, 1 Lolipo. This one's 3 and 2 and less Pure Ice Map. Yeah, so Cormac, this is kind of like the outline of what the TC Yummy deck looks like. Obviously, the last 20 cards are non-engine. So we have obviously Pure Ice Map, we've got Marshmallow, we've got the Yum Yum Yummies continuous spell, which we forgot to go over last time. I think this card overall doesn't really fix any of the problems with the deck, so it's not something that I think is going to be included super often. So yeah, how do you see the new cards fitting their way into the TCG?
Yeah, I think this, especially discussion around Engage that we had in Hornet Drones, I think is a very important point that I want to make when we're looking towards new formats and understanding why certain card choices are made and how the differences are going to come around in TCG. I think the existence of Maxi in the OCG, I say this a lot of the time, but just with more general terms, how it almost funnels a lot of deck building in OCG. Like, probably about a good like 20% of decks are kind of predetermined by having, your Maxis, Ash Blossoms, Call by Crossed, just because of Maxi existing. But I think the secondary things, such as these additional sort of extension pieces, like your Engage and your drones, and there's been plenty of examples in past history as well, where there's been this like new extender that people play in a deck that wasn't really seen in OCG because of the fact of Maxi existing. I think is something that I would take a guess now, when we're speaking 3 weeks out from the set being released, is going to be a major difference when we get to TCG and we see decks with Marshmallow. I think we're likely still going to see Engage and Ornadrones existing within the Yummy decks. Because these cards are just so strong. Like, drawing an Engage alongside any of your Yummy cards makes your plays going first a lot safer into cards like Nibiru, because the token can't be tributed. And also just in general, going second, having like an additional extension play, something that can't immediately get Book-a-Mooned by like an opponent's Cookie Way. They have to use a different level of interaction. I think is really strong at that point as well. So from my perspective anyway, from like my bit of work I've done up to this stage, and also when I look at what I expect in TCG, I don't expect the engages to sort of go down in quantity. I would probably expect a lot of lists to still be maining a couple, if not at least the full complement of them. And then as we go into the new cards, so Marshmallow is obviously very strong. I think another aspect that people might initially consider is that Marshmallow and Engage might have a little bit of a confliction, because if you have, the Kigari or the Hornet Drones on field, you can't special the Marshmallow. But I think in real games, what ends up happening is that isn't really much of a confliction at all, because if you have the Hornet Drones or the Engage, you have that card, and that card is quite strong, and Marshmallow is also just normal summon it, which isn't really too big of an issue. However, what I will say is, from some of the games that I have played, I'm not as convinced on Marshmallow being an immediate 3-of in the TCG, because it itself is similar to Cookie and Lollipo. It isn't actually doing anything itself on its own. It is a good extender to have. So if they, clear your first body, it is a good thing to have that you can just special it out for free. The thing is, you have to recognize how often that is the interaction that is happening, as opposed to, say, like I mentioned, say you play in a mirror match and your opponent, goes Cookie Way to Book-a-Moon, your normal summon, then this Marshmallow still isn't an extender, which is actually, I think, is a really important point that maybe people aren't recognizing straight away. Obviously, you could like lead with the Marshmallow, and then you can normal summon the second piece. But then it also opens you up to things like Izuna. So there's actually a lot of things that you have to think about when it comes to this card. I think it's not as immediate of a 3-of as we would maybe assume straight away. So it might be a case where you end up just playing like 2 copies of it. I think it would be surprising if you went down to 1. But I think there was a world where like this card is like not as much of a stable 3-of immediately as we might suspect. It's maybe closer to a 2-of, just because of that point. And then when we look at the rest of the Yummy engine that's already existing, I wouldn't be surprised. I think we've seen this trend in the OCG as well, where the Lollipo and the Cookie are being cut down from 3, so it's closer to sort of like 2 Cookie and probably 1 Lollipo, because the Lollipo is probably the worst effect of all of them. Just because these cards, they're fine, they're all 1-card starters, but you have such a density of them now at this stage that you don't really need to be drawing tons of them, because if, like I mentioned there, like your first one gets stopped, the second one isn't really doing anything in your hand. So I wouldn't be surprised if, like, say the Lollipos and the Cookies that you remove are probably getting replaced by Marshmallows, and it's just a case of how many of them that you play. So yeah, and I suppose the other last thing I would mention about the engine that already exists is the net amount of surprises. So the first thing that you would immediately think, and I think this is probably how it will end up playing out, is that you just cut down surprise to 1, because now you're able to consistently recur it with the Marshmallow. So you're able to actually search it off Cupsy turn 1, use it, and then be able to actually get it back. So you kind of have a constant recursion. So that's the first level of thinking about it. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably where I think it's going to end up. But there is this point in saying that if people recognize that surprise is now like the major choke point, and if people are going to play like 3 Marshmallow and then 1 surprise and are just, expecting that they're always going to be constantly recycling it, the ability to cut off the access to a surprise might become a bigger choke point to people. So if they're actually hand trapped into Cupsy, which makes this Marshmallow in hand worse because it's not really getting you back anything. There is a world where you could imagine that potentially you start upping the number of surprises again, because then it means that when you hard draw it and people recognize that they should be interacting on the cup C, then you're able to punish that by having the hard drawn surprise, and then you have constant recursion of it again and again and again. So that I think would come into case a lot more if you are less reliant on the non-engine within your deck and you want to play sort of a higher, heavier engine count. Do I suspect that will be the case in a deck like Yummy? I'm not exactly quite sure. I think that's a case of having to play games and seeing how things will play out. But I suppose I just wanted to sort of bring that up because I think we see immediately a lot of people are just going straight away to just cutting it down to one. Again, I would suspect that's how it's going to end up, even at the top cut level of TCG tournaments. But I just wanted to sort of mention that as well as something that could potentially happen as a trend in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, the Yummy engine going second inherently doesn't provide too much like pushes. Like it'll get you bodies, but like it doesn't actually like force things out. It really thrives in the situations where your opponent is like trying to either be proactive and prevent you from getting bodies on board, or just like you get a synchro on board, you're trying to like now threaten some things with like, let's say, make Cookie anyway, your booking cards, and when they respond, oh okay, now Cookie gets to come back. I'm sorry, tag out, and then you get your effects in like on grave because like Cookie and Lollipop going second. Maybe Lollipop into a deck like Mitsurugi provides something, but on average, like those cards aren't going to be super impactful. So you definitely you definitely need like ways that for your engine to push going second outside of just like summoning guys, which is where the cards like Surprise could come in. I think that card is fantastic. Like it is one of the cards that like at least in the current CCG format, like when I'm concerned of my opponent drawing Surprise, both as like a breaker because it gets to bounce and like push really aggressively with minion and just like try and kill you, or it can like play around the different things that you are trying to do to interrupt them. I think this card's really strong. Obviously the lean of the TCG currently has been just like super heavy non-engine count, which I think is like probably the correct way to go about it. But I agree that Surprise is definitely a card that I think could still maintain at 1 or 2 because of like you acknowledge Pepsi being like a really noticeable choke point in a deck that only plays one Surprise. There's no additional way to get it out of your deck. So I think that's definitely an observation worth mentioning. Yeah, that is, I think, how it looked. Like, probably Lollipop down, you said, like 1 or 2 Cookie. So I think if you just go, like, 2 Cookie, 2 Lolly, 2 Marshmallow in the immediate, that's pretty normal, or a pretty, like, acceptable adjustment. Like, I don't think I would be playing the Continuous spell. It's okay if, like, you're expecting Dark Ruler to be a super common card, but on average, not something that I'm super concerned with. Especially when you have, like, access to Surprise, like, almost always off of Marshmallow, and then obviously, Free as well. And then maybe you include Silver in the extra deck. I think it kind of depends on what the format looks like. If there's a lot of Droplet and Dark Ruler, this card may have a little bit more value, but not a card that I think is like an immediate, like, this card has to be included in your list. Especially if you're playing like Hagari and Link Spider, like the OCG has a little bit more space because I don't think they're definitely not including Hagari. I'm not sure about Link Spider and all of it. Yeah, I also think Starham's this is legal OCG as well.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So I think all fantastic points. Maybe you play more Pure Ice Map because Pure Ice Map into a card like Cupsy is solid. But I think the current number was it 16 that kind of 16 is like approaching like the quote unquote like correct is like over 93% can see something around there of drawing at least one of your starters. So yeah, that's definitely a number that I think is probably pretty close to what you want. Maybe like 17 is like ideal if you're playing like Prosperity. Maybe you play like a Pure Ice Map in addition to all of this. But at the same time, like when you're playing so many non-engine, you need to like definitely draw duplicates of like the low impact hand traps if you're gonna try and make that. So we'll see how it pans out. I don't see the deck shifting too consistently like we saw on the OCG list. They look kind of similar to the TCG list already. Obviously, they're playing cards like Coldplay and Crossout to counteract Maxi, but in terms of what is included in their non-engine slots, it's pretty similar to like Imperm, Purge, Dash. It was got some little more droplet now moving forward, which I think is an adjustment that's obviously very good.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. One other thing I wanted to make note of, just in terms of our, one other thing I just wanted to make note of when we were doing our own research into a lot of the OCG lists, kind of on that Marshmallow point again, is I see a lot of OCG lists of Yummy are also main decking multiple copies of Perulia, and that's one other aspect about Marshmallow where it kind of is, it's another card that is just, throwing itself onto the field from your hand. That is like, you don't want to be having like too many of these, especially if it's like your only way to play, and then you special this out, and then you have to like special multiple of your other yummies to be able to sort of get anywhere. So there's probably just one other thing to sort of keep in mind, but like more of these cards are probably just increase, especially if people were cutting down on the engages. This is another aspect where I talk about how we compare TCG to OCG deck building. We see a lot of Perulias there because a lot of people are cutting the engages in favor of the Marshmallows. Whereas if we look at TCG, if we are still going to be playing the engages and maybe might still play, like might even max out in the Marshmallows, but that Perulia might be less powerful in TCG than it would be in OCG because we're probably going to be more likely playing more copies of Engage. So you're going to be getting less reward from it on average. Just one other thing I wanted to bring up.
Oh, that's a really good observation. Because like you said, we have obviously Engage in the TCG. So like we'll see how Perulia shapes up, but like if you look at the first list where it's 3 Ice Map, 9 names, and then only Obedience Gold is like the additional like card that plays around Perulia, I think you're gonna get on average like at least 1, if not 2, and maybe 3, depending on how much they want to extend with that card or extend into that card. So I think it's a really solid point to bring up. Yeah, we will see how this shapes up. Like obviously, if the format is DDD and Yummy and whatever else, like Perulia may not even see too much play, and it may not be a big concern. But if like Yummy gets played and like we'll say in a theoretical word like Engage goes down to 1, then Perulia obviously has a lot more value because like you're gonna hit a lot of more decks. And obviously we don't have Max C, so TCG players are looking for every sort of floodgate and just like high impact non-engine to play. So we'll see how that shapes up over here. Yeah, I think currently it'd just be like cut down on cookies, maybe throw in a Prayer Ice map, so you go like 2-1, 2 Marshmallow, like a Prayer Ice map here. Maybe a second one over the Surprise, depending on how you want to play the deck. Just like maximizing on starters and minimizing on the potential clunk, but obviously lowering your ceiling a little bit going second. So yeah, any final thoughts, Cormac? I think this is a solid overview for the decks and where they're going to end up. And then in the future, we're going to do some videos of us playing games against each other. Hopefully, just like maybe some live ones, maybe some reviews. We'll see what the people are interested in. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all the decks? Now that we've taken a little bit more of an overview.
Yeah, I'm really excited to sort of get into the gameplay because I think more than many of the recent formats, a lot of these games that we play in Yu-Gi-Oh are not going to be as dictated by the deck list that we have, and it's going to be much more dictated by the quality of our technical play. So I think that's going to be something I'm really going to enjoy as we get into that process. I suppose the one thing that I just really wanted to highlight as as we went through this whole conversation is I hope people are kind of understanding how we're evaluating these cards as we're looking to put them potentially into our decks into the future, and also understanding how to sort of read the deck list and we're looking at something like OCG, for example, or we're looking at different areas here and there, not just what those cards are and then just sort of copy pasting that deck list, but also understanding sort of the key differences that might exist between formats, and then recognizing, okay, well, how does that then impact other things? So I feel like those are some of the key points that I could sort of drive home in this video. I hope people are really able to understand them and we're able to take something away from it. And yeah, I'm just sort of really, like I said, really looking forward to getting into the games.
100%. So yeah, like I think it's a fantastic point to hammer home. Like obviously, if you want to like cook from ground zero, you are more than welcome to like reading all the cards, reading the entire set, just like trying to figure out from the beginning like how you want to build your deck and construct it. Me, I'm more just like I try to be efficient. Like I'll read the cards as they come up. Obviously I'll read the cards in the set closer to it, but I think the OCG in general has like a pretty good understanding of how to play the game. Like I may not agree with all of, like their non-engine decisions, but I think in terms of like their what cards they deem as like valuable and strong, I've never seen like a big problem in terms of like, oh, like there's like not playing 3 cups here. They obviously understand like consistency and like the power level of cards, so pretty high level. I'm not like obviously we may find like some TCG exclusives that impact things, but on average, I think when I look at an OCG deck list, I have a pretty good understanding of what cards I should include in my deck, and then maybe I can find some additional deck slots based on the. Yeah, I think that is a good place to end it. Hopefully, we'll have some gameplay up in the next few days. And yeah, thanks for hanging out, Cormac. Much appreciated. Shout out to him and the Disciples. And we'll get some more coming in the future. Thanks for hanging out.